Zen and the Art of Remaining Awake. Part 2, the 30th of December 2020. The mind and heart of a student of Zen is open and delighted to see the interrelationship of all things, even an assemblage as odd as Ben Okri's poetry, George Orwell's warning concerning facile, prefabricated language, Adolf Hitler's rages, and T.S. Eliot's longing for shanty. William Wordsworth believed that, at its best, the mind of man is framed even like the breath and harmony of music. In this mindful, Zen-like state, a dark, invisible workmanship becomes apparent, workmanship that reconciles discordant elements. Today's grouping may appear discordant. Time magazine, a quip from Albert Einstein, the giddy flight path of the sun, the Buddha's insight, a line from the diary of Anne Frank, a bold assertion by the poet Shelley, an admonition by the philosopher Emerson, a montage of some of the key events of the year 1953, an optimistic speculation by Lord Byron, a mystical vision penned by Edgar Allan Poe, and a haiku by the 17th century Japanese poet Matsuo Basho. Listen mindfully as these golden beads along a dark, invisible thread are strung one by one. Today, Wednesday, is a day associated with the Anglo-Saxon god Woden, the father of Thor, a mythological being associated with wisdom, magic, war, and death. A god often depicted with two ravens, companions who remind him of the importance of fearlessness when pursuing the truth. These days, digitally enhanced, the heroes of Norse mythology entertain cinema goers. We must look for real heroes elsewhere, especially in the field of politics. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have just been voted Persons of the Year by Time magazine. In 3 weeks, the boy from Pennsylvania, aged 78, will become the 46th President of the United States, and Harris will become the first woman, black or Asian American Vice President in American history. In 1999, Time magazine voted Albert Einstein the person of the century. This was the man who teased us with a paradox reminiscent of a Zen koan. The most incomprehensible thing about the world, he said, is that it is comprehensible. Yet my mind balks at what science reveals, and today's accepted facts would have astonished those natives of Peru who stretched a net across a ravine in order to catch the sun. Little did they know how ambitious they were being, for the earth, like a delirious toddler, is careering around the sun at 18 miles per second, while our indispensable star, which accounts for 99.86% of the mass of the solar system, is also on a pilgrimage, hurtling at 500,000 miles per hour as it orbits the midpoint of the Milky Way. Additionally, the Milky Way herself is plunging towards Andromeda at 1.3 million miles per hour, a leap of another 372 miles with every beat of your heart. Such facts accord with the Buddha's insight. Everything is in flux, and change is the only constant. It is therefore unwise for the human heart or mind to seek refuge in and become emotionally or psychologically dependent on any one home, whether that be a religion, a building, a nation, a guru, a politician, a person, or a belief. Today's leaden sky leaks only rain. Yet for me, it also summons the spirit of Anne Frank, who found sufficient strength to allow a frail beam of optimism to pierce the gloom of her curtained attic. A line in her diary reads, "I believe in the sun, even when it rains." Considering her predicament, a lockdown that lasted 761 days, Anne's attitude was admirable, and is, if possible, to be emulated, especially as today's sun seems unwilling to shed joy on a world ravaged by COVID. Trump and Johnson dominate the news, and fear is pervasive. The fear that these two men, so ignorant of science, have abysmally failed in their responsibilities. Another fear attends me too, one voiced by Arthur Koestler in his autobiography Arrow in the Blue. The chronicler, Koestler noted, is driven by the fear that the events of which he is a witness and which are part of his life, their colour, shape and emotional impact, will be irretrievably lost to the future unless he preserve them. But enough of fear. An expectation attends these endeavours too, that by means of words and processes akin to osmosis, I transcend the isolation of the self. Though it's true that Trump and Johnson dominate the news, the bad weather has featured too. Unending cloudbursts brought flooding to the Cotswolds throughout our cancelled Christmas, and today's heavy downpour has turned the Ebbly bypass into a river. It's nearly midnight and bed beckons, but so too does a responsibility to shine a light on these dark days and, if possible, to sing. Yes, sing. For even in the darkest year of the 20th century, 1939, Bertolt Brecht advised us to try. In the dark times, will there also be singing, he asked, before answering his own question. Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. The greatest of romantic poets, Percy Bysshe Shelley, declared poets to be the unacknowledged legislators of the world, and his treatise remains persuasive that by broadening the sympathies of their readers, poets shape morality and, consequently, civil law. How do they work that charm? By purging from our inward sight the film of familiarity, which obscures from us the wonder of our being. Our familiarity with the astonishing fact that we're alive, that we are alive, you and I, and at such a time with the world teetering on the edge of an abyss. That film of familiarity blinds us to so much. The insanity of the fact that even in the 21st century gender, sexual orientation and skin colour are considered consequential. The fact that rape, pillage and slavery remain widespread. The fact that for some, education is considered a privilege and not a basic human right. The fact that stockpiles of nuclear weapons and levels of CO2 emissions continue to rise. The fact that the dogs of war still roam unmuzzled. The fact that billionaires dream of sending rockets to Mars while turning a blind eye to fellow earthbound neighbours who are starving to death in Sudan. The film of familiarity blinds us to beauty as well. John Muir, the ecologist, noted this phenomenon. It was in 1849, after his family migrated from America to Scotland, that Muir, then aged 11, started attending what he called the University of the Wilderness. He clearly graduated with a first-class degree, because Muir became the man who almost single-handedly established the Yosemite National Park, thereby safeguarding one of our planet's natural wonders for posterity. Halfway along a circuitous 1,000-mile trek, from Indiana to the Gulf of Mexico, high in the mountains of California, Muir made this observation regarding everyday beauty. Fresh beauty startles us when seen, but its very abundance prevents it being appreciated. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the New England poet, philosopher and advocate of self-reliance, put it more poetically and far more powerfully. If the stars should appear but one night in 1,000 years, how men would believe and adore, and preserve for many generations the remembrance of the city of God which had been shown. But every night come out these envoys of beauty, and light the universe with their admonishing smile. In her luminous poem, Cornucopia, of which these are but a few lines, the American poet Laura Weaver urges us to banquet upon the inexhaustible abundance of beauty that the universe so freely bequeaths us. If we have any task, she says, it is this, to live in this exquisite seeing, to clear our eyes of the dust of memory and expectation that would leave us blind to what we most long for. Even in the leanest of years, when our bodies are racked with grief, there is more than enough beauty to feed all the species of this world. Take the Pleiades, take Jupiter arcing west in the night sky, take the bees that roll over on the flowers, drunken with nectar. Having travelled with me thus far, you are entitled to know more about your guide, and it's tempting to try to begin at the beginning. Beginnings, however, are well nigh impossible to determine, for long before we were born, the river of our lives was being fed by countless tributaries that had already themselves streamed through innumerable generations. Never mind the fact that 4.5 billion years ago, about the time the earth was formed, the atoms composing our bodies were being forged within the distant hearts of pulsating stars. That life came into being at all is made more startling still when we recall that the distance to even our nearest star is more than 200,000 times the distance between the earth and the sun. Stardust we may be, but we incarnate on earth trailing our parents' and grandparents' karma. The woman within whom I gestated for 9 months, the manner in which she was raised, the degree to which society and her family encouraged or discouraged her ambitions, her identification with any particular race or religion, her economic status, her diet, and particularly the attitudes she adopted, were factors that shaped her and consequently sculpted me, to which must be added her chosen partner's input, my father's DNA, and the world into which I was born. I drew my first breath in a bustling and optimistic Tel Aviv on Sunday the 22nd of November 1953. Every year has its highs and lows, clues that humankind has climbed another rung of the evolutionary ladder, then proof positive that he's still down on all fours. 1953 was no exception. The year began with a colossal bang when President Truman informed the world that America had just exploded a hydrogen bomb, 400 times more powerful than the weapon that destroyed Nagasaki. Nicknamed the Sausage, the device had vaporized the Pacific island, unfortunate enough to have been designated a test site. The Cold War's thermometer plummeted. Senator Joseph McCarthy's Committee of Un-American Activities bared its fangs. Election fever brought America out in a cold sweat. On Broadway, Arthur Miller's Crucible medicated a frazzled population with a homespun tale of an earlier hit witch hunt. But this wasn't enough to stop Eisenhower, Truman's successor, from refusing an appeal on behalf of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, sentenced to death for spying for the USSR. In February, years of dedicated scientific research undertaken by Francis Crick, James Watson, Rosalind Franklin and Maurice Wilkins coalesced, enabling humankind to decipher the structure of DNA, the double helical self-replicating material that carries genetic information. On the 1st of March, another surprise. After a night's hard drinking with his cronies, Joseph Stalin died. Though his villa in Moscow was guarded by a double perimeter fence, 300 crack troops and anti-aircraft guns, 74-year-old Uncle Joe couldn't evade as deft an assassin as a cerebral hemorrhage. He was found unconscious in his bedroom at 10 p.m. and died 4 days later. His bodyguards may have saved him, had fear not prevented them from entering his room. The man who had terrorized 150 million of his fellow citizens for 30 years was, just like that, no more. It was around this time that I was conceived, with the air rank with the stench of realpolitik. Only 8 short years had passed since Hitler had drawn a pistol, pressed it to his temple and blown out his brains. But old allies were now enemies, and old enemies were now friends. The day after Stalin's death, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, the architect of Germany's invasions of Poland, France and Russia, and the man who had instructed his soldiers to appreciate the necessity for the harshest punishment for Jews as the spiritual forebears of Bolshevism, was released by the British on medical grounds. Manstein was suffering from depression. His mood, however, soon lifted as he began a distinguished career as an advisor to the new German army. In April, Ian Fleming, drawing on his experiences in British naval intelligence, published Casino Royale, introducing the world to James Bond, the spy whose designator, 007, afforded him a license to kill. In May, under medical supervision, Aldous Huxley, Britain's preeminent intellectual, digested 400 milligrams of mescaline, after which he wrote The Doors of Perception, a treatise which in the 1960s would become a Bible to the hippie generation. Huxley claimed that he now understood why the Indians of Mexico venerated this naturally occurring psychedelic, for though blind in one eye and with little vision in the other, gnawing the cactus had enabled him to glimpse an astounding reality behind the everyday appearance of things. For under the influence of the drug, even the drapes of his trousers revealed a labyrinth of endlessly significant complexity. May climaxed on the 29th, when, in a bid to climb higher than anyone had before, Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary planted flags on the summit of Mount Everest. 4 days later, news of their achievement rippled through already excited crowds, gathered to catch a glimpse of a 27-year-old woman in a white silk dress and gold-encrusted shoes, metamorphosing into Queen Elizabeth II. The 2nd of June proved one of the wettest days of the year. But rain failed to dampen the crowd's enthusiasm or the incredulity of those watching the spectacle on 10-inch black and white TV sets. 2 weeks after the coronation, at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility, the Rosenbergs were strapped into electric chairs. Julius died after a shock of between 2 and 2,500 volts. Ethel was not so fortunate. She raged against the dying of the light and required 5 shocks before, with smoke rising from her head, her heart finally capitulated. In July came relief when, after a 3-year bloodbath that cost 5 million lives, the Korean War ended. The conflict, one of the first major proxy wars of the Cold War, concluded with an armistice but no peace treaty, leading to ongoing fear and friction along the 38th parallel that separates North and South Korea. In August came earth-shaking news when Russia tested a hydrogen bomb of its own. I imagine my mother scanning the papers under a blazing Middle Eastern sun and wonder if their headlines left upon my budding brain the image of a world teetering towards Armageddon. Later that month, Alfred Kinsley reported on the sexual behaviour in the human female and was criticised for promoting degeneracy by bringing to public notice practices previously kept secret. An up-and-coming evangelist, Billy Graham, warned that it was impossible to overestimate the damage that this book would do to the already degenerating morals of America. In September, English sweetmakers were delighted to hear that sugar rationing had finally ended. And some families in Germany were even more delighted, for the Russians were beginning to release the first of the 2.8 million German prisoners of war they still held. In October, 27-year-old Fidel Castro delivered his "History will absolve me" speech after being sentenced to 15 years in prison for leading an armed insurrection against Colonel Batista, the military dictator with friends in the mafia, who was presiding over an economy that was drastically widening the gap between the richest and poorest Cubans. Receiving less publicity than these events in the Caribbean were the 2 nuclear tests conducted by the British in Emu Field, a remote location in South Australia, tests conducted without consultation with the indigenous population. Then, in November, I emerged upon what Shakespeare called this great stage of fools. To complete 1953's calendar, in December, the first Colourvision televisions went on sale in America for around $1,175 a set, or over $14,000 in today's money. Additionally, pouring fuel on Billy Graham's moral indignation, 54,000 copies of Playboy magazine with Marilyn Monroe on its cover went on sale at 50 cents apiece. I record these events as 2020 draws to an end. Almost 70 years have passed since I was born, and I could all too easily fall into the trap of thinking, where have they gone, all those days, weeks, months and years? My father's job in the British Council meant I didn't settle in Israel, but, like a well-cast pebble, skipped west across the infinity pool of eternity, all the way to mystical Mexico, then east again, to a land of mist and myth-filled forests, Finland, and then, finally, west, to Jamaica. And it was there, on that earthly paradise in the early 1960s that I first reluctantly attended school, raised the pencil-shaped letters, and fell in love with the English language, the amber within which this time capsule is preserved. It is true that these words are comprised of no more than ink, but Lord Byron reminds us, a small drop of ink falling like dew upon a thought produces that which makes thousands, perhaps millions, think. And that's important, because as Edgar Allan Poe understood, just as no thought can entirely perish, so no act is without infinite consequence. In his story, The Power of Words, the author of countless tales of terror conjures not a demon, but an angel, to explain why everything interconnects and why Gaia's oxygen-laced mantle is divine. We moved our hands, says an angel, when we were dwellers on the earth, and in so doing we gave vibration to the atmosphere which engirdled it. This vibration was indefinitely extended till it gave pulse to every particle of the earth's air, which thenceforth and forever was actuated by that one movement of a hand. If ever tempted to allow dwelling space to the thought, where have all my days gone? Allow this haiku by the 17th century Japanese poet Matsuo Basho to point you in the right direction. This dedicated student of Zen Buddhism may have been silently thinking or crying aloud when he experienced this satori, this awakening. How admirable! He who thinks not life is fleeting when he sees the lightning flash. Since I began reading this, part 2 of Zen and the art of remaining awake, my heart and yours has pulsed approximately 1,400 times, during which time the sun has jumped another 1,000,000 miles closer to Andromeda, with which it and our beautiful planet will eventually collide in approximately 4.5 billion years. Enjoy the ride, and the next time you see lightning, remember, life is anything but fleeting.